Ms. Taylor, if you would call that, please.
Certainly. Our next item is the board work group on wine industry and wine grower excise tax data. This board work group will be facilitated by Member Cohen and Member Schaefer.
So is it Vice Chair Schaefer or Ms. Cohen? Who's going to take the lead on this?
I'm here. Thank you.
Oh, okay.
I'm definitely happy to take the lead on this. Just for clarification, Chair, is it possible if we could just recess and convene the work group and then reconvene right before closing? That way we could give all of our closings at the same time. I don't know. Never mind. Forget that. Let's just go ahead and get started. Hold on. Ugh. If you guys could see me, if this camera was really on, juggling baby and my notes.
In your notes, I understand. Go ahead.
Okay, so I actually have several remarks that I want to make at this time. So this has actually been an enjoyable process, and I have to say that I've enjoyed working with Mike Schaefer's staff on making this possible. And I want to also begin by thanking the executive director and her staff for working on options for a potential administrative solution that would actually allow disclosure of volume of sales data and other relevant information filed by taxpayers to continue to preserve the confidentiality of individual taxpayers. Of course, this is acknowledging the fact that we are extracting taxpayers' zip codes. So at this point, we welcome this examination of potential administrative solutions that would provide for the public dissemination of additional data. Of course, again, speaking within the confines of taxpayer confidentiality. The preservation of taxpayer confidentiality is essential to any administrative solution in this area. And want to acknowledge also that we must carefully examine our options to make sure that by disclosing this data, we also preserve the taxpayers' confidentiality requirements by the current law. So, Ms. Fleming, excited to hear what you have to say. Just upon review of today's report of the executive director, I just wanted to, I can make the following motion now. I don't know if there's any discussion, but well, let me just go ahead and make the motion, and then we can discuss the motion and discuss anything and everything else. I'd like to make a motion that the board direct the executive director to post taxpayer data related to the wine industry by zip code that has been redacted to preserve the taxpayer confidentiality in accordance with the existing law. So that's the motion that I have on the table and happy to discuss. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I second that motion unless someone else has seconded. I heard it.
I don't think you heard a second. I think you heard Madison in the background. So we don't have a second.
So it's been moved in second. Now, did you want the executive director to weigh in on this, or you want us to discuss it?
Yes, I think it would be interesting just to get her on the hear her voice in the meeting. So yes, executive director, please weigh in.
Thank you, Madison. So members, thank you for the opportunity to respond. So just to recap, the board tasked me with looking into the feasibility of providing the wine grower excise tax data by zip code. And this was designed to look at the feasibility of an administrative remedy. In the original discussion, if you recall, members, we were looking at two options. One was an administrative remedy. The second was a legislative remedy. The importance that was stated as a part of this proposal, members, was that we would continue to protect the confidentiality of taxpayer information, of course, and we've done our diligence to ensure that that occurred. I applaud my staff because they've completed a very, very detailed and very thorough and analytical review of the broad range of wine grower excise tax data based upon the request to determine what data could be made available by zip code. To make the most information available, we wanted to take the broadest opportunities that we could while still maintaining the confidentiality precautions. We applied the following set of standards or criteria, if you will. The first set of criteria that we used was we wanted to look at the broadest scope of data, which means that we included all of the reporting periods. So this exercise included a full calendar year of information. That was the first step in the scope of information that we reviewed. The second set of standard or criteria that we applied was there had to be at least 4 taxpayers per zip code. The third item was that one taxpayer could not represent more than 80% of the information in a particular column of data per zip code. The results, and I'll give you a little bit more insight into that. The results of our detailed analysis utilizing these criteria are as follows. The results showed that there are approximately 1,040 different zip codes represented in the 2020 Wine Growers Report. So over 1,000 zip codes, 1,040 specifically, were represented in the 2020 Wine Growers Report, and that was the scope of the material that we did as a part of the exercise to see what's possible. Of those 1,040 zip codes, 136 zip codes met the standard for 4 or more taxpayers. And in that, the 136 zip codes with 4 or more taxpayers contained some disclosable data. So if you imagine the first sort was broad, we narrowed it down to out of the 1,000 plus zip codes down to 136. So with that 136, some of the information is disclosable. A little bit more detail. The disclosable detail in those 136 zip codes was further reviewed to ensure that no taxpayer represented more than 80% of a specific column per zip code. Again, based upon the criteria that we noted earlier. Let me help you visualize this to see if it helps, because I would like to encourage us not to have a real technical discussion on data analytics because it's a brain teaser, but just to simplify it for you, if I may. If you consider, and I think everybody for the most part has seen Excel spreadsheets, if you imagine a spreadsheet with rows and then columns, right? There are 136 rows, and that represents the zip codes, representing a disclosable zip code, and then there are 58 columns representing the data fields and that information is represented what's on the tax return. So 136 rows with 58 columns of information. Of the 136 rows of zip codes, approximately 70% of the rows had over half of the columns redacted, and many of the rows had one or two of the 58 columns redacted. So if you imagine this, the redaction would show that we just basically would darken that area. So what that tells you is that some portion of the information is redacted, but then there's also a portion of the information that is available. It's just a smaller set, but there is disclosable information. Members, basically the results of the analysis revealed that the information indeed to your initial question can be aggregated and reported by zip code. However, by adding zip code as an additional element to consider and then applying the criteria, the results conveyed an increase in redacted information. So again, let me offer a bit of an example. You've all been online and done a Google search. So if you were to go in and do a Google search, for example, and just type in restaurants, it's going to give you a long list of restaurants. If you go in and apply Italian restaurants, it's going to narrow your scope. If you then go in and say Italian restaurants in Sacramento, it narrows it. That's what happened when we applied zip codes. It just narrows the amounts of information. It narrows down that list. It basically trims it down. When it's trimmed down, then we have to do a closer examination to make sure that the confidentiality is there. Even with that exercise, much of the information is still non-disclosable, but there is a smaller portion of the data that could be disclosed. Based on our analysis, the annual statewide aggregated data on this specific program that is complete and disclosable is either currently available or will be made available on the BOE's open data portal. And we'll work with our technology staff to make sure that we can add that information so it's publicly available. People can look at ways of searching that. I don't have the detail on that for you today, members, but any disclosable information, we will do our best to make sure that that information is made available, consistent with the open data portal. We're always going to continue, members, to look for ways to increase our transparency and access to public domain data, and we'll continue to review what can be done on an ongoing basis. That concludes my report. If there's any questions, I am available to, and I'd like members if we just keep it without getting into the technical examination of data analytics, if you so allow. Thank you.
Member Gaines has a hand up.
Yeah, thank you. If I could just ask a question of the executive director in terms of why is this issue coming up? If this has been information that's been provided to the Wine Institute for, I think, decades, what has changed that has precluded the release of this information again this year?
So I'll pause just to, as a part of a work group, to defer to Ms. Cohen and Vice Chair Schaefer as the co-chairs if they want to address that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Mr. Gaines, could you repeat that question? I think you're looking for like why specifically?
Yeah, why is it that the BOE cannot release this information as they have released it in the past?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Let me, as I have come to understand it, is that there's the law or the legislation that is changed is precluding us. So I'm not quite sure if although the information was previously released, one could argue that it should not have been.
Ms. Cohen, would you like me to assist?
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. So I just wanted to be respectful and defer to our co-chairs. So if I may, BOE prior to 2017, members had a practice of providing a list of information, public domain data available to anyone who subscribed for it. And we had a number of people who would come to the agency to subscribe to get access to a variety of data, or types of data for the variety of tax programs, alcoholic beverage being one of them. And in that public domain data, you can subscribe to it. Thank you, staff. Give me a second here. They can subscribe to it as provided in a listserv. In addition to that, that public domain data is also provided on our what we refer to as the open data portal. The intent of the open data portal on those lists are any data that's categorized as public domain data is, taxpayers have a right to see as part of government transparency. So for years, that information was provided. And just for comment, if you recall, I believe the stakeholder with interest in this area actually presented this in a prior meeting a couple of months ago. So the information was provided, Mr. Gaines, and just as a part of that, apparently just one of the errors that we made, just a human error that was made at the time, was that there was a slight category of data that was provided and that on the returns for the alcoholic beverage tax program, data on those returns was given to this specific industry group and the representatives that we're talking about. When we shifted to new technology, there are a number of factors. One of the bigger ones is we had a split in the organization. So you had two different agencies now looking at data differently. As you know, alcoholic beverage tax program moved to BOE, but we are still basically contracting with CDTFA to do, some of the efficiencies of it. The second piece of it was that technology shift. So as that technology shifted from our old system to our new system, there's a little bit of a review of how does data work, et cetera, et cetera. So that's just a high level, some of the conditions that changed. When then we got a request from this specific stakeholder, the request came to CDTFA to say, I'd like to see the data that I had historically been receiving. At that point, with this shift in technology, new role players, new staff, just a kind of an aggregation of changes, CDTFA appropriately said, based upon that, we have to refer you to the agency who is responsible for that tax program. that came to us to our disclosure office as a Public Records Act category of a request. When that's examined, just the key there is then the way that it was provided in public domain was a little bit more was definitely more flexible. It's public domain. But when the request came to us under this current climate, it came to us as a Public Records Act request, which means legal does a review. And they have to apply the rules and the laws, et cetera, that apply to Public Records Acts in terms of confidentiality of data. So long story short, that shift caused the conversation to shift from public domain data, which was in error. And there's some background in between there where we went to just confirm, with AG's office, what's appropriate and not appropriate under the laws regarding confidentiality. It was determined that a greater percentage of the information on the return is in fact non-disclosable. So that narrowed what we were able to provide to the stakeholder. Stakeholder, of course, is saying, wait, I've been getting it historically, so that Reader's Digest version at a very high level is a summary of basically where we got today. So Ms. Cohen, Mr. Vice Chair Schaefer, I'll turn it back. Unless you have other questions, Mr. Gaines.
Just to follow up, if I could, because so has the law changed, has statute changed over time that, or was it just a legal review of our operation, acting now because of AB 102, now that information is handled a little differently.
Yeah,
so,
and that fundamentally, the key is that the law that changed was AB 102, just shifted to organizations that causes you to review your processes, who owns it.
Okay.
And so everybody sort of does that check and balance. In terms of confidentiality law, that law has not changed.
Okay, very well. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure my staff will send me a note if I've misstated. I don't see anything popping up on my screen, so I trust that I'm on point.
Senator Gaines, that was a far more fuller answer than what I provided to you.
But you would take full credit for it, ma'am.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, I just appreciate the clarity.
Do any of you other colleagues have any other questions?
I
Looks
do.
like Yvette
Ms.
Stowers
Stowers
does.
up there. Go ahead.
Okay. I kind of want to back up. You started off, Ms. Fleming, saying that you started off with over 1,000 zip codes, and then you narrowed it down to 136.
Correct.
I follow that logic. Where you kind of lost me at was that you said one taxpayer could not represent greater than 80%. 80% of what again? 80%
of any specific zip code.
Of any zip code. Okay.
Yeah, and the general rule, without getting into, because again, it's a slippery slope to get into this level of data analytics and the rules that are applied. But in essence, those standards that we applied, which is, 4 of the taxpayers and not one taxpayer being greater than 80%, really is designed because the narrower your information, then it's more easily able to either through deduction or through examination, figure out and identify who that taxpayer is. And so that was through the data analytics exercise that staff went through. They apply a number of tests basically to see what's going to give you the broadest opportunity for data, but finding the balance of maintaining the confidentiality. So you don't want to give, make it so narrow that you can come back and identify, who the taxpayer is. So you just keep basically doing a tweak, if you will, to your calibration to allow you to maintain the anonymity of the confidential information while at the same time trying to at least look at what might be disclosable. So that just happened to be the right balance.
Okay, so based on that, I actually have 2 questions, and I acknowledge that maybe the chair and the vice chair maybe have a better feel for what you think that you can provide, since I'm assuming they've seen it. But my first question is, what are you redacting?
So the redacting information is dealing with identifiable information typically, and I'm going to ask staff to send me a couple of bullets here, basically identifiable information. So it's going to be the name of the taxpayer, the address of the taxpayer, just for note, historically, zip code was the geographic information that wasn't previously included. It also included tax penalties, that kind of category of information.
Okay, so you're going to redact the name, the address, the tax and the penalty, but you're not going to redact the zip code.
Well, so the zip code in and of itself was not a non-disclosable, was not a confidential item. So
was not, a
it was,
zip code is not considered to be a part of the address?
it is part of the address. So it's, again, I'm being careful here because if we're gonna, I'm trying to find the balance between making sure we're answering your questions and now getting into the depths of the analytical data. But there's certain categories of data that are disclosable and others that are not. And so zip code is historically has not been a part of the report. Providing the information by geographic identification has historically not been, but the specific zip code in and of itself as a data element is not defined as confidential.
So the zip code is not defined as confidential. And you're telling me in the past when they were receiving this information, they were not getting the zip code or they were getting the zip code?
So historically, they were not getting any geographic information because the issue is that when you start to take zip address plus street address, street name, zip code, the composite of that information makes you able to identify who the business is. If you extract one of those data elements, just a zip code, with the combination that we talked about, Deputy Controller Stowers. So when I mask it with those other items, I can provide information by zip code, applying those standards. If I just provided everyone by zip code without those standards, you could identify, and that renders us into a being able to identify the taxpayer. So it's not just the issue of it's just zip code. This is a part of the formula. So it's zip code with the criteria that we established. So it's a year's worth of data, 4 or more taxpayers, no one taxpayer with 80 more. That combination by zip code gave us the opportunity to show you what was disclosable and not disclosable. It allowed us to share information without revealing any identifiable information. So data threaded together, the aggregated data threaded together can give you different results. And it's basically a way of configuring those specific elements that meets a threshold that just says, okay, I can safely go here, but I can't go any narrower.
Okay. My second and final question, maybe final, no promises, is that from my understanding, the Rhine Institute is asking basically for information so they can look at what's happening in the industry on a regional basis. That's what they're saying. That's their ultimate goal. They want it on a regional basis so they can analyze the industry. Are you confident that what you're saying that you can put into the open data portable is going to provide them with the ability to analyze on a regional basis? I lied. Second question, third question. Have you consulted with them?
So let me ask the easier. Personally, I have not had a conversation with them. Again, as a work group item, the co-chairs of the work group item have, according to the work group rules, have had those conversations. If we need to get into that level of technical detail, I'm happy to talk with the stakeholder to assist in any way that I can with limited access, using staff, but always willing to try to help out where we can. So in terms of the second question, Deputy Controller Stowers, in terms of my confidence, in terms of what I am confident of is we understand data. And I'm not trying to be a smarty pants, but we do understand data and we do understand the thresholds of maintaining confidentiality. So what I do know and I'm confident in is our ability to say we will meet the standards and maintain confidentiality. We're going to try to be helpful, but we will maintain the standard for confidentiality. So we will hold to that, and then whatever is in a public domain or disclosable category, working with staff to determine how that information could be provided. So our first, as a governmental function, our first and foremost focus is to protect taxpayer information. As Member Cohen and Vice Chair Schaefer has discussed before as a part of this discussion. So I am confident in our ability to apply the appropriate standards, understanding the data as well as we do. And I'm thankful to have subject matter experts who are overseeing this very tightly. And just my former resume allows me to be a little sensitive to data protections.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Fleming. I appreciate your response. Member Cohen, Member Schaefer, are you guys confident or have an opinion on whether it's going to meet the constituents' needs as far as what you're proposing?
I think it's up to the industry to determine whether or not what we provide is valuable. So it's hard to say. It's up to the constituent to determine that, but I think we have carried it as far as we can on this body.
Yeah,
Okay.
we've done our
I
best to give you the broadest brush possible, while protecting, what we're statutorily responsible for. But we're trying to give you the broadest brush. And again, just to note, again, a part of the other option that was given direction was this was one of two options in terms of remedies. One being administrative to check the feasibility, and the other legislatively. So I defer back to the co-chairs.
Thank you. And as one of the co-chairs, Ms. Fleming, I want to also let you know that we have a representative on the line that could probably best answer your question.
I'm gonna be quiet, Member Cohen. I just want to say thank you for the detailed report, Ms. Fleming. I'm gonna as normal rest. I have confidence that your staff has done an analysis, and what you're saying that you can release is within the confines of existing law. That you're not going to be providing any disclosable information. And as you guys all know, one of my main concerns was protecting taxpayer confidentiality, and I do believe all of you guys had that same concern. But that has been my main concern about this project, confidentiality, and also the trust that taxpayers have with us when they file their tax return, their excess tax return, that we're going to protect their data. I mean, that's really important. And also the knowing that we are going to protect it and it's going to increase compliance. I don't want to send anyone down the path where they're not going to disclose information because they think that we're going to share it with the general public. But Ms. Fleming, if you're saying that you've come up with a way to do it that is not going to provide any confidential information, I will be quiet from this point forward. Thank you.
Ms. Fleming, sorry, Ms. Stowers, those, yes, all of our concerns and are the same. And we certainly stated that on day one. What I would like to do is maybe at this point pivot and bring the representative on, the industry representative who is on the public line. So Ms. Taylor, maybe you could help.
Certainly, yes. AT&T, could you please let us know if the representative is on the line or if there's anyone else that would like to make a comment?
For comments, please press 1 and then 0. 1 and then 0. Okay, one moment. I'm going to open up the line here. We're just making sure it's your representative. It'll be just a moment. Okay, Tim Schmeiser, your line is open.
Good afternoon, members. Tim Schmelzer with Wine Institute is now on the line.
Great, welcome, Mr. Schmelzer. Wanted to give you an opportunity to say a few comments and speak to particularly Ms. Stowers' question or statement.
There's a bunch of questions, so hopefully I'll do my best, I'll say.
Okay. Yeah.
I listened carefully, and I've been made aware of the administrative efforts to provide data. I do believe it's a positive step forward. We're going to have to see the data to really make the full assessment, but anything that enhances our ability to geographically differentiate some of this data really helps us greatly to understand what's happening within our industry. For example, what may be happening in Napa could be entirely different than what's happening in the Central Valley, than is happening in Monterey, et cetera, et cetera. So anything that helps with our understanding of that is extremely useful to the industry and greatly appreciated. That being said, no diss on the efforts. I really do appreciate it. It is, in our opinion, a one step forward towards a disclosure that we were previously receiving prior to all this, the historical data that we were being provided. We have been listening hard to all this, and the second option besides this administrative method has been to develop a legislative solution. And I did want to let you all know that at Wine Institute, we've been working with our legal counsel and our economist and have developed what we think is simple legislation that would essentially solve this issue for us. And it was just adopted for support by my board of directors last week. So I look forward to being able to share that with the board and would encourage the board to consider supporting the legislation at a future board meeting.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Vasquez, I turn it back over to you. I think that pretty much exhausts the topic. There's not much more to say.
We need to officially take a vote, though, right, on the motion, right?
We do, and we probably need to take public comment on it as well.
Yes. And Ms. Taylor, did we check if there was anybody else? I know we had no other written comments, but did we have any others on the line that wish to speak?
Let me check with AT&T. AT&T, did we have any other speakers that had queued up?
Presently, we don't right now. As a reminder, it's 1 and then 0 for comments. 1 and then 0. No one is in queue.
Okay.
Hi, Chairman Vasquez, if I can.
Yes, go ahead.
Just as a reminder to the board, this is a work group, so the motion would take the form of a recommendation to the board. Obviously, to the extent that there's consensus, the executive director is free to start working on the item and moving forward on that basis. But just as a reminder, according to the work group charter, this would be the motion, even though it would be, if it's approved by the members present, it would be a recommendation to the board. So it would need to be ratified at the next meeting.
So along those lines, do we need to take a vote or can we just have a consensus?
Sorry, a consensus would be fine. That's enough to give direction to the executive director.
Since you mentioned it's just a recommendation moving forward, right?
Yes, or if you want to formalize it, a vote is fine as well. So again, it would be a recommendation to the board that would be significant enough to have the executive move forward on that consensus.
Okay. Let me ask the two co-chairs, are you comfortable with just a consensus or should we take an official vote? It is a recommendation. Does it matter?
It doesn't matter. I'm happy to take up the recommendation.
Okay. So it looks like, unless I see any objections, there's a consensus that we move forward with the recommendation, and then we'll take it up with the full board in January.
So do I need to make a motion to rescind the motion that's on the table?
I think you're okay.
I guess Mr. Henry Nanjo, just for clarification, or Ms. Taylor.
So, yeah, if we could ask Chief Counsel to join us, but I think the adjustment that would be needed, and Chief Counsel, please correct it, is that you're making a recommendation to the board instead of the direction to the ED. So in this case, your recommendation is to the board, that modified language, the rest of it could be the same, and then the full board then can either take it up today or could agendize it, excuse me, at a subsequent meeting, Chief Counsel.
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct. It
Roll call votes are
have
required.
to be at a subsequent meeting because this meeting's already been adjourned. So.
Okay, so just so I heard correctly, I'll make a motion to rescind the motion that's on the floor open. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second that.
All right, thank you. So Mr. Vasquez has seconded that motion. We could take, I don't think we need to take public comment on that. And then what I'd like to do is just, what you said to
I just make a formal recommendation,
make a formal recommendation. Okay, so then at this point, I'd like to make a formal recommendation that the board direct the executive director to post taxpayer data related information to the wine industry by zip code that has been redacted to preserve taxpayers' confidentiality in accordance with the existing law. That's the recommendation that I'm going to bring to the full board for a vote.
Member Cohen, I do apologize for the information, because if I could just offer one suggestion, instead of posting it, it would be an issue of disclosing it.
Okay, I said post, but I meant disclose. That's exactly right. Thank you.
Okay, so we don't need to take a formal vote. It looks like there's a consensus. So that's the recommendation. It'll be brought to the board at our January meeting. Correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Are we, can Mr. Najo, I believe we should probably take a vote.
Okay.
Yeah, we should take a vote. So again, members and staff, okay, so the roll call vote, because we're on in a different environment. We're not in the public meeting. So taking a roll call vote, I think would be consistent with our end best practice. Since the regular board meeting has been adjourned, we cannot go back to that item at this point. So this would be an official recommendation by roll call vote. Then the item would be ratified at the next public meeting when the regular board meeting convenes in January.
Yes, I would concur with the executive director. If this is going to be a formal recommendation to the board, the vote is
Time discussing procedure here.
All right, Ms. Taylor,
Yes,
if you would go ahead and call that.
Yes.
Certainly. Chairman Vasquez,
Aye.
Vice Chair Schaefer,
Aye.
Member Gaines,
Aye.
Member Cohen,
Aye.
Deputy Controller Stowers.
Aye.
So that's unanimous. It'll be, the recommendation will go forward at our next meeting. And with that, unless there's anything else that you had, co-chairs, seeing and hearing no other recommendations, then we will officially close out this work group meeting and adjourn it. And like I had mentioned earlier, we will not be having a second or a meeting tomorrow, subsequent meeting to our meeting that we just adjourned earlier today. So our next official meeting won't be until the January the 25th and 26th. And with that, once again, just wishing everybody a good and happy and safe holidays, as well as a happy new year. Thank you all, and thank you all for your patience. I know it was a little bit of a lengthy meeting today, but I guess it's a good way to close out my tenure as the chair. So, and I want to just thank you, the staff, the members, and specifically my staff, starting with my chief of staff, Kari Hammond, and everybody else that's been working really hard during this whole COVID period. Thank you all and wish you all the best, and stay safe. And if you're in those circles or those groups, especially large groups, be careful. This COVID is real. I just saw a little announcement that the US just broke the record for other countries. 800,000 people have died from COVID so far. So protect yourself, wear a mask, especially if you're indoors or with large groups, and be safe.
Thank you.
Thank you all, and thank you, staff.
Thank you.
See you next year,
Thank you,
everyone.
members. Happy holidays. Happy
Happy
birthday.
holidays all.
Take
Happy
care.
birthday, Ms. Cohen. Thank you all.
Bye.
Thanks.
Thank you, staff.